begin making this mounting, we make the under bezels for the 3 center stones. This piece of platinum is 1.2 millimeters thick and is just a little narrower than the 2 side stones are wide. We mark off the length of the stone and cut about halfway into the platinum strip. Then mark for the second stone, and again saw in about halfway into the platinum stock. We don't want to cut all the way through it at this time, because the extra length of the stock makes it easier to hold. Lay the diamond table down onto the platinum to make sure that the marks are correct. We want the platinum square to be just slightly smaller than the diamond. Set the dividers to 1 millimeter and scribe a line all the way around all 4 sides of both of the squares. Then drill a hole through the platinum. And thread your saw blade through it and saw out the inside of each of the squares. Saw right up to, but not cutting into the scribed line. Use a small square needle file to clean up the holes. Lay the diamonds on top to make sure you have the correct size. At this point, we can finish sawing through and cut the 2 squares apart, and the under bezels for the 2 side princess cuts are finished. Repeat the process to make the under bezel for the center stone. Lay out all 3 under bezels together next to the diamonds to make sure the lengths are correct. It is always better to keep checking your work as you progress along, as it is easier to make a change now. Next, file the sides at a slight angle to form the curved top to the ring. File opposite sides of the center under bezel and 1 side on each of the 2 side under bezels. Then clamp 2 of the under bezels together and using 1500 platinum solder weld them together. When cooled, clamp the other under bezel for the other side stone to the opposite side of the center under bezel and solder it on. One advantage of working with platinum is that we can use 1500 solder on both sides, and even though the solder joints are fairly close together, the heat will not travel through the platinum and cause us any problems as it would have if this was gold. Next, we need to make the crowns for the 2 tapered baguettes. First, select a piece of platinum 1.5 millimeters thick and as wide as the widest end of the tapered baguette. Mark the length of the first baguette and then saw part way into the platinum stock. Then cut from the sides to the depth of the narrow end of the baguette. File the taper onto the end of the stock. And then check with the diamond to make sure you have the right angle and have filed far enough. Then file the taper for the second baguette. Once we have the shape filed correctly, set your dividers to 1 millimeter and again mark off 1 millimeter sides all the way around the platinum. Next, drill a hole in each under bezel. I like using the point of a graver to mark the platinum before I drill rather than using a center punch. It's less cumbersome for me, and the gravers are nearby and easy to use. When you drill the platinum, be sure to use plenty of lubricant on the drill bit and use a slow speed. You do not want to drill fast because that will cause the drill bit to overheat and possibly break or damage the bit. Then feed a saw blade through the hole and cut out the center of the under bezels for the tapered baguettes. Use the saw blade as a file and clean up along the sides of the cutout. Once the center is cut out of the under bezels, you can cut them apart. Be sure and use lots of lubricant on your saw blade. Cutting a little notch in the side of the bench pin will help hold the metal stock, making it easier to hold it still while you're sawing. Then cut 2 pieces of 1 millimeter square platinum wire a little longer than the widest part of the baguette. Clamp them with tungsten tip tweezers. We can hold our 2 pieces together between the jaws of the tweezers and place the 1500 platinum solder in place and solder right between the jaws of the tweezers. The tungsten tips will not contaminate the platinum, so we can just solder directly in the tweezers. Solder one side, and then turn the tweezers over to solder the other side. Repeat the process on the other baguette crown. Next, file the square wire down so that it is even with the sides of the crown. Then file the end of the crown smooth and at an angle to fit against the under bezels for the center crown to continue the curve around the top of the ring. Next, clean up the under bezels in the baguette crowns, using 300 grit emery paper to remove all of the file marks. Then solder the baguette crowns to the 3 center under bezels. Clamp the center crown under bezel and one of the baguette crowns, solder together using 1500 solder, and then repeat the process on the other side. The next step is to make the bottom bezel. Use a strip of 1.2 millimeter thick platinum with a width that is 10% narrower than the center stone is long, and bend it in a ring bender. Then place it over a ring mandrel and using a nylon-faced hammer even out the curvature and make sure it's to the correct size for the ring. File out any marks from the ring bender and also smooth off the top of the platinum. When it's bent, it tends to have a little bit of a concave surface, and so we have to even it out. Then use 320 grit emery paper to remove the file marks. Proceed to 400 grit, and then finally use 600 grit emery paper. Polish the top surface with a hard felt wheel using platinum tripoli. On our flex shaft, we have this little plastic guard that we've made from the top of a Coke bottle, which keeps the polishing dust from blowing in our face. Next, file an angle on the inside points of the baguette crown to match the curvature of the under bezel. Check it and file a little more until we have a nice even surface between the baguette crown and the under bezel. After you cut the bottom bezel to length, solder it to the top section of the ring. Clamp them in tungsten tip tweezers and solder them together using 1500 solder. Once soldered together, cut the bottom bezel to match the under bezels. The width is fine for the center stone, but it's a little bit wide for the two side princess cuts and for the baguettes. Carefully saw the bottom bezel without hitting any of the under bezels. Saw to match the profiles so that the bottom bezel is about the same size or slightly smaller than the under bezels. Then file it to smooth and shape it. File off the ends so that the bottom bezel and the ends of the baguette crowns are even. Next, lay the stones on top and check to make sure everything lines up. It is always easier to make adjustments now than later when the ring is completely put together. Clean off our file marks, again using 320 grit emery paper. Progress to the 400 grit. And then to the 600 grit emery paper. Next, place the ring top in a ring clamp by holding on to the baguette crowns with the clamp, and drill a hole in the bottom bezel to line up with the 3 center princess cut stones. Take it out of the ring clamp, turn it over, and feed a saw blade through one of the holes to cut out the center of the bottom bezel. Be careful not to hit the under bezel while sawing. It's a little tricky to do this, but it's easier to saw this now after it's all assembled, rather than trying to saw these cuts in the bottom bezel before we solder it, and hope that everything is all lined up after assembly. Once the holes are cut, use the saw blade as a small file and trim up the corners so that the squares are nice and even.